when I spoke about why Switzerland doesn't do true high-speed rail in one of my early videos, the comment section was filled with intellectually robust arguments SBB forgot to consider when choosing not to pursue high-speed rail. But is it really true that only large countries can make best use of high-speed rail, and small country high-speed rail are just vain vanity projects? There's no doubt that a large country maximizes high-speed rail investment and benefits, and in the case of China's high-speed rail, it can reduce airfare prices and frequencies. Naturally, this leads to the predominant discourse that high-speed rail is only worthwhile in distances around 700 to 800 kilometers. But there is also a theorized minimum distance of about 100 kilometers to make high-speed rail worth it when compared with conventional rail, after accounting for the acceleration and deceleration. 100 to 800 kilometers seems to be the magic number for high-speed rail that can effectively distinguish itself in service level from lower speed trains, but also one where the much faster jet-powered passenger planes can't compete with on time saving. Now, for those who've completed 6th grade geography, you will know that Switzerland is a small country that definitely isn't 800 kilometers long. In fact, it maxes out at about 300 kilometers from St. Gallen to Geneva. That would call into question the viability of high-speed rail in this country. And to make matters worse, you'd currently be hard-pressed to go 100 kilometers on a train without stopping, with only the intercity service between Art Goldau and Bellinzona somewhat reaching this milestone. So today we're going to take a theoretical ride on exploring whether small countries like Switzerland are too small for high-speed rail. Before we get into the fun nitty-gritty, I will need to set aside some caveats. When I refer to high-speed rail, I'm generally talking about the category of high-speed rail that is 250 kilometers and above. Technically, Switzerland already has this high-speed rail, but it maxes out at 200 kilometers an hour. And yes, I do know that the Gotthard Base Tunnel is the only place in Switzerland where trains are permitted to travel 230 kilometers an hour in order to make up for delays. But this is the exception. When you hear me say high-speed rail, I'm referring to the fast boys going over 250 kilometers an hour. And everything else that is sub 200 kilometers an hour is what I refer to as conventional or lower speed rail. Now, all decisions, including high-speed rail, are largely economic ones. So this video isn't so much about the technical possibilities of high-speed rail, but rather seeing how much we could bring the gap between economical cost and benefit a little closer. So with that out of the way, let's dive into some high-speed rail in small places. In my previous video about why Switzerland's trains are slow, clickbaity title, I know, throw me a bone, I said they maxed out at 200 kilometers an hour because Switzerland has limited funds and decided to put stat points into frequency, reliability, density, and somewhat relatively high speed. Sure, Switzerland could have dumped all their resources into speed, but doing so would break the other characteristics that truly make this network impressive, and one of the best networks in Europe. The small country and limited space remaining in between the mountains and established cities and towns left little room to easily expand the network to include high-speed rail, because having high-speed rail is all about right-of-ways. And to build these straight-line right-of-ways would require an injection of an insane amount of funds, likely enough to probably devalue the Swiss franc. Look, I won't rehash the video too much, so just go and watch it to bring yourself up to speed. It's a rubbish mic sound, I know, but you'll get the point. The topic of high-speed rail in Switzerland isn't new, with proposals to develop a direct network along the Central Plateau being conceived in the early 50s, as well as the current modern-day outlandish proposal for a high-speed magnetic levitating railway that reeks of another billionaire's play toy that's never really gotten off the ground, and something he dropped faster than he thought about it. Now, when we look at the main rail axes of Switzerland, we can see the major settlements in the country naturally being connected with simple, straightforward lines. The east-west axis represents the bulk of SBB traffic, but also the north-south Basel to Lugano route are also major rail lines. The east-west route, where the current IC1 travels from St. Gallen to Geneva Airport, takes about 4 hours and 40 minutes. Not too long, but not fast either. Most of these routes, the train isn't really traveling more than 120 kilometers an hour due to the winding curvy track. These curvy tracks are a well-known problem and something I've spoken about commonly on this channel. Also, the IC1 has a lot of stops within close proximity to each other. 6 of the largest cities in Switzerland lay on the IC1 route, but the other 8 stops are all small connecting stops nearby, such as Rennen, I'm probably butchering that name, being close to Lausanne, Zurich-Oerlikon being close to Zurich Hauptbahnhof, and Zurich Flughafen also being close to Zurich Hauptbahnhof. And then we have the smaller regional towns, such as Wil, Uzwil, Flawil,
I believe you've met my fitness consigliere.
Gossau, between Zurich and St. Gallen. I also cut off Fribourg because even though it's still a city, it's still somewhat close already to Bern. By eliminating these stops, the distances between stations increase, enabling longer stretches at higher speeds between St. Gallen and Winterthur, Zurich and Bern and Lausanne and Geneva. That would cut down the near 5-hour slog from end to end down to around a sub 2-hour journey, if top speeds were increased to about 300 kilometers an hour. Now, I know the people that are users of the cannibalized stations would gasp in horror at losing their connection to the most important Swiss railway route, but just keep in mind, this is theoretical. And in the theoretical world where Switzerland has the funds to build a high-speed rail, they would also have the theoretical funds to build regional connections to high-speed rail stations in order to maintain your high level of service. Now, saving around 2 hours is a remarkable improvement in a small country like Switzerland, and it would certainly put an end to the many of the groans that arise at the mere mention of travelling between Zurich and Geneva. Now, that's the east-west connection. The north-south connection from Basel to Lugano would yield even better results. Currently, a trip from Basel to Lugano in the Italian-speaking region takes just under 3 hours, regardless of whether you transit through Zurich to change trains or go direct with a longer stop over in Lucerne. To make this a proper high-speed connection, routing via Zurich would be necessary to link up with the east-west connection. And once we chop out the more regional stations such as Zug, Artgoldau, and Bellinzona, we can reduce the total travel time down from just under 3 hours to just over an hour. So, those are the two immediately obvious plausible high-speed rail lines Switzerland could create or adapt, as they already contain high-speed sections such as the Gotthard Base Tunnel and the Mattstetten to Rothirst. Whilst the Swiss high-speed rail network at this stage is a plausible exercise, there are actually some other small countries who have taken the step of developing smaller high-speed rail networks. The small island nation of Taiwan is comparable in size and shape to Switzerland. Like Switzerland, it is mountainous with settlements concentrated along a linear corridor of flatter terrain. The Taiwanese constructed a dedicated high-speed rail network to connect their industrial cities with a network spanning about 350 kilometers. The service reaches a maximum of around 300 kilometers per hour operating speeds and completes a total journey in just under 2 hours. Now, I know Taiwan is a much denser country population-wise, and the rail line has had to make some numerous compromises, such as having stations on the city peripheries. This is well within Switzerland's capabilities to develop, and the economics of such a system wouldn't differ too much, considering the country's substantial wealth. Not only is the Taiwanese high-speed rail system effective, it's also profitable. Even though the early years it faced some financial difficulties, over the years the rail company pulled itself into the black. We'll touch on public transport profitability in another video, but for now, let's move a little north to South Korea. The slightly larger and also wealthy country of South Korea has a somewhat extensive high-speed rail line. Although it is a larger country than Switzerland, its line length is around 450 kilometers, a distance that sits squarely in the value proposition of high-speed rail. South Korea serves as an example of how you don't need massive distances to make high-speed rail viable. Before we move on over to Europe, I would just like to acknowledge the high-speed rail line in the tiny area of what we would refer to as Hong Kong. If you're wondering why I'm speaking in a tentative language, it's because I don't want to nuke my social credit score, as I would like to one day ride Chinese high-speed rail. So, moving on over to Europe, the two smaller European countries that have high-speed rail are Belgium and Netherlands. Both these countries have a funny language, as well as bits and pieces of high-speed rail sections, with the Netherlands high-speed rail network stretching from Amsterdam to its southern border, whilst Belgium's high-speed rail network stretches from its northern border to its southern border and connects cities like Antwerp and Brussels, as well as a spur line from Brussels to Belgium's eastern border. Now, for those who have mastered the advanced technical skill of grade 5 geography, you will quickly realize that Netherlands and Belgium are actually neighbors, and that their high-speed rail lines link up. As well as having a high-speed rail connections to each other, they also have normal rail connections over to Germany, and on the wider network to the UK via France. This level of international rail integration also applies to Switzerland. It'll come as a shock to some of you, but Switzerland isn't an island in the middle of the ocean, like Taiwan, although they do share commonalities in strategic military planning and challenges. Switzerland is a famously landlocked country, sandwiched between 4 countries, well, 5 if you include Liechtenstein, with very well-developed and interconnected railways, 3 of which have high-speed rail lines over 250 kilometers an hour. Which brings me to my next point. High-speed rail might not make sense domestically in small countries, but when connected together with other neighboring countries, the longer tracked and higher patronage international connections make high-speed rail lines a lot more viable. Cities in Switzerland are highly connected to all their international neighbors. From Zurich, you can take direct trains to Paris, Milan, and Munich. Notably, the route between Munich and Zurich held the distinction of Switzerland's most frequently delayed train in 2023. That accolade now belongs to the Venice to Geneva train. When these connections are calculated in, the possible length of high-speed rail increases. And yes, I know Zurich has connections to Vienna, but Austria is somewhat in the same boat as Switzerland. There are more high-speed rail connections in Switzerland than Zurich to just about everywhere, with Geneva, Lausanne, and Basel. With Basel being a hilarious one because having German and French trains all converging together, the day was very common where I would walk through the station and look up at the departure board to see train cancelled warnings everywhere. And after a brief moment of panic, trying to figure out how I would get home from work, I would realize that it must be Tuesday again, as the German trains were all too late, and thus cancelled by SBB, and the French drivers went on strike for the third time in a row. Fortunately, all the Swiss trains were still operating as normal. It's not only the large cities that be connected by high-speed rail, as down here in the canton of Wallis lies the cities of Visp and Brieg. These two cities exist as the headquarters for large international companies, the gateway to some of Switzerland's most famous ski resorts, and also home to FIFA presidents Sepp Blatter and Gianni Infantino. Yes, FIFA's two most infamous presidents, one who evaded numerous corruption allegations, and the other who once claimed to feel like an immigrant worker, despite earning a generous 4 million Swiss franc salary, along with a few other questionable sentiments. Visp and Brieg sit on the Simplon Railway that connects from Lausanne to Brieg and then down to Domodossola in Italy, through the Simplon Tunnel with the major connection from Bern through the Lötschberg base tunnel as well. In the case of the Lötschberg and Simplon Tunnel, this connection serves as both an important domestic connection for businesses and tourists, but it's also an important international connection down to Milan that is already a busy route during peak times. These tunnels were built and upgraded as part of Switzerland's NEAT project, the Neue Eisenbahn Alpentransversal. In English, the new railway link through the Alps. This project serves to create another north-south railway Alps crossing. When considering the business case for constructing high-speed rail in small countries like Switzerland, many factors must be taken into account beyond just the need to offer more climate-friendly alternatives to driving and flying in order to make such a venture viable. Now, I'm not going to sit here and give you the most boring business case of dollars and figures from an Excel spreadsheet, because you and I would rather be out drinking beers, but there are a few examples of market possibilities that could underpin the case of high-speed rail in Switzerland. The first one being the Gotthard Road Tunnel. Currently, they are building the second Gotthard Road Tunnel tube because 20-kilometer long traffic jams on either end of the Swiss Alps finally pissed the Swiss off enough to ratify, by way of referendum, the decision to build another road tunnel tube. Now, there's lots to talk about here, but the north-south traffic is insane due to the amount of foreign cars driving through. According to the Swiss Federal Statistical Office, around 2/3 of transalpine road traffic either starts or ends in Switzerland. The remaining third is merely passing through. But when it comes to rail traffic, that number drops sharply, with just 1% of transalpine train travel are neither starting nor ending in Switzerland. These statistics amalgamate all alpine traffic, but what is distinguished is the difference in purpose of travel, and here is where we start to see leisure travel using the road absolutely dominating business and commuting. With rail, businesses and commuter travel make up a third of trips, whilst the Simplon Tunnel sites at over 50% of trips being business or commuting. We can't infer too much from this data, but it becomes clearer when we play with Google Maps destinations that a train from anywhere in Germany to the Germans' second favorite holiday destination, Italy, gets significantly slowed down by the railway network in Switzerland. Which leads to probably the most unfortunate mismatch a network could have, because you don't know when you'll be going fast in Germany, and in Switzerland, you at least know you'll be going slowly. Of course, there's still much to be desired when it comes to Germany's rail system, but a high-speed rail network in Switzerland could shave 2 hours off that journey. And once Germany and Italy get their shit together, a reliable high-speed connection between those two countries would only add to the overall benefit. I don't think I need to cover too much the international connection benefits, as we all know how nice it is to go to a different city in another country for a holiday. But what about domestic benefits? Given the local population would primarily be the ones left with the bill, what benefits and opportunities could convince them of this massive infrastructure spend? Well, the most obvious opportunity for high-speed rail in Switzerland is challenging the domestic airline market. This might sound absurd to some of you, but Switzerland, a country of about 350 kilometers long at its widest, has a domestic flight from Geneva to Zurich, which is about 300 kilometers away. This route is already served by the 3-hour train IC1, but Swiss, the airline, sees a market in domestic connections. This isn't just some small domestic narrow-body jet doing short hops. Sometimes they fly the A340 and Boeing 777. For those who aren't av geeks, these are large planes designed to fly long-haul international flights carrying hundreds of people. They burn a lot of fuel, and the short 1-hour trips are certainly not what they're designed for. Now, before you get your pitchforks out and rant and rave about this stupidity, let me shed some light on this madness. One of the big reasons Swiss does this route is fleet repositioning. Zurich and Geneva are hubs of Swiss and the Lufthansa group. Sometimes Swiss will fly a narrow body in and out of Zurich, and then later in the day, they reposition it to fly out of Geneva the following day. That repositioning flight is a revenue-generating possibility. Trains can't really compete with this, as they don't generally have space in the luggage rack for someone to bring on a passenger jet. The second reason is, of course, the connecting flight perks. Zurich is Switzerland's largest airport and has quite some destinations, but both Geneva and Zurich airports serve different destinations. And this is where high-speed rail can compete with the connecting flights. As mentioned before, Zurich is a larger airport with 3 runways and inherently more connections. Some flight booking data shows that 8 out of 10 passengers who flew the Geneva-Zurich route connected to an onward flight. When it comes to connecting flights, if you have luggage, connecting with the flight is easier. Yes, Swiss, the airline, does provide a train ticket option and also guarantees your ticket in case of missed train connections or flight connections, but they don't carry or transfer your bags for you through the train. According to Swiss, they want to optimally connect passengers in the French-speaking region to their whole network, such as Zurich Airport. I have been on trips with people where they fly onward to Geneva, and they said the plane was simply faster, because if you aren't arriving too late in the evening, the flights generally come every 1.5 hours, so the plane connections are generally fast, and without having to pick up your luggage and sit in a busy train. People often factor in the extra time involved in air travel, like arriving at the airport 2 hours early for security and waiting for bags afterwards, when comparing it to trains. And while that's a fair point in many places, the reality is that flying is often still faster thanks to the improvements in screening. If you're flying Swiss, bag drop is quick, especially with the widespread self-service options. And once you land in Zurich, it's usually just a smooth transfer to your next flight, whether that's to Geneva or elsewhere, and the same goes in reverse. But the truth is, we don't really know the exact modus operandi of domestic Swiss flights, rather than just Swiss utilizing the train network. What we can only really put it down to is that there is a market for it, and it helps the airline. The aviation market is a cutthroat one, and they certainly wouldn't be running loss-making flights for shits and giggles, so something about this connection must make economical sense. But to really pull market share away from Swiss's monopoly domestic market, the train would need to be high speed to really cut down the transit time to an unbeatable competitive time. At which point Swiss would see the benefit in redeploying its domestic airline fleet elsewhere rather than trying to be just less than an hour faster. Swiss aren't the only carriers to offer a railway connection service, as the German carrier Lufthansa and national railway operator Deutsche Bahn also have a similar air rail connecting ticket. But with Deutsche Bahn's notorious unreliability, I don't think Lufthansa is all that enthused about this. Not like they can talk. Now, whenever high-speed rail projects come up, the obvious question that follows is, who and how are we going to pay for it? As mentioned numerous times that I'm pretty much sick of it, high-speed rail is expensive, especially when you want to maintain the project management golden triangle of cost, time, and scope. Or in transport-related terms, speed, cost, and reliability / network density. So before I close out this video, I just want to generally touch on the economics of smaller scale high-speed rail. I'm not going to whip out the Excel spreadsheets and do business cases, but more, I just want to bring a little closer together the cost-benefit arguments. Theoretically, when it comes to paying for high-speed rail, there needs to be a strong synergy between public and private funding, as going fully private or public can lead to inefficiencies. Ticket sales aren't enough to fully cover the massive capital and operational expenditure required, and purely public funding could be very volatile or not politically expedient. In the case of Taiwan's high-speed rail, stations were placed on the outskirts of major urban areas not directly connecting with existing rail infrastructure, with plans to develop substantial new settlements around them, using the high-speed rail company itself as the primary driver of development and growth. This model is primarily private enterprise driven and is employed heavily in Japan's network as well. Essentially, the trains serve as literal cattle cars to bring the cash cows to their development. And as small, densely populated countries, the provision of new housing and commercial is always a welcome benefit, with the housing market somewhat cornered from being able to sprawl, with people preferring proximity to the densely connected areas. Moving a bit more to the public sector funding argument, incorporating some of the private land development's bonuses are of course beneficial, but governments have an age-old secret weapon up their sleeve: taxation. Whilst private land development arising from access to new high-speed rail connections brings in direct revenue, the benefit of the access doesn't magically stop at the border of the land development company. And so property owned by others nearby to the station will have their land increase in value without the high-speed rail operators directly benefiting from it financially, apart from their increased consumption through train tickets or whatever commercial enterprises they interact with near the stations owned by the rail companies. Governments, on the other hand, are able to levy this increase in land value through multiple taxes such as land value taxes, sales tax, and assuming the gentrification of the area, income taxes. This is called value capture, and I won't go too much into it as that'll be the topic of another video as well. Now, if you were to stretch this out over 300 kilometers with about 4 to 5 development zones, this could equal a significant boost to the economy worth billions over decades that might well justify the significant investment in high-speed rail. And with international connections, the economic benefits are only compounded with more tourist and business-related travel. The cost of a flight ticket between Zurich and Geneva is about 240 francs one way. Of course, this price changes with return and onward tickets, but you get the gist. 240 francs is certainly a price point that high-speed rail can compete with, given that the current ticket prices from Zurich to Geneva with the train are about 100 francs one way, full fare, with the train departing every hour. I know a lot of people complain about the cost of trains in Switzerland, but yeah, it's generally not that expensive for Swiss people with the half-fare card subscription that gives you guessed it, half-price tickets. And when you include the prospect of having to take luggage with you, the restrictions on train luggage are a lot more limited than the strict policies of airlines and possibilities to fleece you because you dare ask them to put a suitcase into the luggage hold. As mentioned, high-speed rail has the power to affect change in airline prices and market share, as was the case in China, France, and Italy. So taking on the domestic Swiss monopoly air route is a possibility. So, are Switzerland and other small nations too small for high-speed rail? Not necessarily. While it's true that the traditional economic case for high-speed rail is stronger in large countries with sprawling distances and concentrated travel corridors, Switzerland offers a unique blend of conditions that challenge that assumption. The country's compact size, dense network of well-connected cities, and proximity to multiple major economies create the perfect storm of potential for high-speed rail, both domestically and internationally. Theoretical upgrades to the east-west and north-south rail axes show that a massive time savings are possible, transforming journeys of 3 to 5 hours into sub-2-hour commute. And with key infrastructure like the Gotthard and Lötschberg base tunnels already in place, the foundation for faster travel isn't just a fantasy, it's actually already partially built. Now, just to make clear how big of a challenge this infrastructure build would be, in order to overcome all the little cute villages, the lakes, and massive mountains that trains don't do well at high speeds on, there will need to be a lot, and I mean a lot, of new tunnels and track realignments. A back-of-the-napkin Google Maps calculator shows Switzerland would need to build the equivalent of about 4 new Gotthard base tunnels. The Gotthard base tunnel opened in 2016 for the cost of about just over 12 billion Swiss francs. So if we add on inflation and increased costs of construction, let's say about 15 billion, to build all the infrastructure needed for the simple north-south, east-west high-speed network, you're looking at about 60 billion francs in today's money. That's only for the tracks alone, not including new stations, rolling stock, or land resumption costs. 60 billion. Actually, doesn't sound that bad for how awesome high-speed rail would be. Put this into comparison, Australia spent nearly 42 billion Swiss francs converted in the last 30 years to build half-assed road projects that barely work. And don't get me started on the NBN. Anyway, back to high-speed rail. High-speed rail would also bring domestic advantages, reducing the need for short-haul flights, freeing up valuable airport capacity, and enabling economic development around new or upgraded stations, which wouldn't really be the case for Switzerland as all major cities are pretty much built out already. But the regular commuter travel ridership and spending habits at existing train stations would for sure be boosted. Internationally, it would strengthen Switzerland's role as a central node in Europe's transport network, especially if connections to Italy, Germany, and France are properly integrated. Assuming France can get through an enterprise bargaining agreement that doesn't devolve into strikes and riots, and the Germans, just in general, get their shit together. Yes, the costs are high, but so are the potential gains, both in saved time and in long-term economic, environmental, and social benefits. But costs are just one matter countries need to contend with when building massive high-speed rail networks. Most countries that aren't China often struggle to politically sell high-speed rail, as democracy can work wonders such as watering down strategic projects to the point of uselessness in order to achieve the necessary consensus among the population. Whether funded through public investment, private development partnerships, or a mix of both, small nations often have both the wealth and strategic position to make it work. For a quickfire round of similarly sized nations with high-speed rail possibility, Slovenia, Czech, and Slovakia are all important rail routes in the east of Europe. Singapore is a micro-state, but when put into geographical context next to Malaysia, with which it shares major economic and political ties with, the 300-kilometer jaunt to Malaysia's capital Kuala Lumpur from Singapore would definitely be a viable connection. And finally, the populous eastern seaboard of the small developing nation Australia definitely could benefit from high-speed rail. So, there's another rubbish reason of why we can't have high-speed rail. gone. I hope you enjoyed this more theoretical video about high-speed rail in small countries. Got a few more that I could also cover, and also got a few more things to cover about high-speed rail, particularly the economics cost, and particularly about the one in Australia, because there's a lot of crap talk about that. Small channel update to finish out. Yeah, thanks for all the support. Definitely going my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the algorithm, and it probably encourages me to go write some more trains. And I'll be releasing another one soon, hopefully, depending on how the weather goes.